Alright, before I start, I'd like you to look around your classroom. Now that you have, you've probably realized that majority of your classmates are Caucasian, compared to blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and Indians. But why is this? Now think about your last college visit. What race dominated the campus? Most likely, it was Caucasian, unless of course it was an HBCU. But why is this? Why are majority of college campuses dominated by the Caucasian race? And why is there such a lack of minorities in college? That's what I'm morally outraged about. The lack of minority presence throughout America's elite universities is a current phenomenon that is expanding in its popularity. Because of this, African and Latino Americans are experiencing a new form of systematic racism that is ultimately crippling the intellectual progress of their prosperity. Originated in the elementary classroom, minorities begin their learning process with disadvantages created by the public school systems. Throughout their intellectual development, young minorities are constantly reminded that they are below those who go to predominantly Caucasian institutes or private schools, which can also contribute to their negative mentality on education. Mandatory learning development evaluations, such as standardized testing, created to examine the intellectual aptitude of students after years of formal education, automatically disqualify an abundance of minorities from having an opportunity to further their learning at a firmly established university because of the systematic disadvantage they have been given at the start of their education. A 2009 study by Georgetown University focusing on race in college indicates that from 1995 to 2009, 72% of white students attended one of America's top 486 colleges, while only 17% of minorities, African Americans, and Hispanic Americans attended one. This study is only one out of many that supports claims of unfair disadvantages that American minorities struggle with throughout their educational careers. But before we dive deeper into this topic, let's first look at the origin of where this all started. In 1896, a Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, shocked America. Homer Plessy, identified as an African American, brought a case to the Supreme Court after being arrested for sitting in an all-white section of a train. He argued that the arrest was unconstitutional. After long debate, the Supreme Court contended that African Americans were separate but equal. The notion remained relevant to the nation as it was practiced by a predominantly Caucasian establishment in public domains throughout America. Particularly affected by the separate but equal doctrine, American public school systems of the 20th century symbolized the raw characterization of segregation. However, in 1954, a Supreme Court case endeavored to challenge this doctrine. The case, known as Brown versus the Board of Education, served as a pivotal catalyst toward the civil rights movement. Led by Thurgood Marshall, Brown versus the Board of Education represented 5 separate desegregation cases. In the end, the Supreme Court unanimously agreed that the separate but equal notion was innately unconstitutional. Serving as a threshold to the integration of schools, Brown versus the Board of Education provided African Americans with a new reality in which they could prosper and endeavor in an environment where they were impartial to Caucasians. However, that is not the case today. A 2012 study by the U.S. Department of Education indicates that majority of U.S. states have schools in which at least 80% of students are Caucasian. The study also found that as of 2011, 40% of all public school students were poor. That same year, students of color accounted for a majority of public school students for the first time in U.S. history. So where is the connection between segregation of schools and the lack of minorities in top colleges? First, let's compare public school versus private school, particularly Catholic school. A 2014 study by the Department of Education found that Catholic high school students were twice as likely to attend and graduate college than their public school counterparts. 63% of students attending a private school had families with an income of $50,000 or more, while only 8% of students had families with an income of $20,000 or below. However, over 22% of children had families with an income of $20,000 or below in public schools. Public schools supply the student with a standard education that sometimes does not fulfill the well-rounded character in which private education grants to students, such as religious aspects, to educators that are more devout to their teaching. Top colleges look for the versatile persona in which private school students embody, making it easier at times for them to be accepted into one, whereas many times public school students are left to build their own personas. In this pursuit, a young student can become clueless as to what top colleges truly look for in a potential pupil. One aspect of education in which top colleges take highly into consideration is a student's test scores. A 2010 study by the Harvard Graduate School of Education contended that the average score on the reading part of the SAT was 429 for black students that year, 99 points behind the average for white students. Once again, minority students are given an unfair disadvantage. Now, let's analyze the moral aspect of this issue. The Catholic Church contends that it is the choice of the child's parents in where they should attend school. The Catholic Church acknowledges that not all families are well endowed. Therefore, they contend that the government should restructure its educational funding to give families a choice about the education they desire for their children. Because the government does not do enough to ensure that all families have a plethora of options to choose for their child, the issue becomes a violation of the human person and their dignity. When God created each human, He granted them the gift of human intellect and dignity. We use our intellect to embody our purpose that God has given us in His likeness. Students of the public schools are handicapped with this God-given intellect due to the fact that some students do not nurture their human intellect with the necessary knowledge it needs in order to flourish. Because of this, it cripples human dignity, as the student does not feel intellectually prepared. This defaults in the low sense of self-respect, self-worth, integrity, and even empowerment in which a public school student manifests. Majority of the time, this reflects itself in the work ethic of public school students. Concerning natural law, let's take a look at normative ethics. Normative ethics examine the perpetrators, the action, and the outcome of the issue at hand. They question if the outcome is justified by the action. In this case, the perpetrators would be the government, which controls the public school systems. The action would be not funding into their assurance that all U.S. citizens, particularly minorities, have a good choice in what schools they would like their children to attend, and the outcome would be the fact that many minorities will not get into top American colleges. The act is not justifiable due to the fact that the government can do more to ensure that a well-rounded education is granted to all Americans, yet they choose not to. The issue being discussed is also violating laws pertaining to the Old and New Testament. Found in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 15, verse 7, an Old Testament law contests. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. The government is not doing this by refusing to better prepare their public school systems and funding programs, leaving minorities' intellectual progress at stake. Found in Book 1 of Timothy, chapter 4, verse 12, a New Testament law contends, do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Young minorities are being robbed of their rights to this New Testament law due to the fact that they feel that they cannot be those who set an example because they are not the people attending America's top colleges. Now, let's move on to civil law. Regarding civil law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a landmark legislation prohibiting the discrimination in several areas, including housing, employment, and education. The law prohibited discrimination on the basis of sex, color, race, religion, or national origin by the public elementary and secondary schools and public institutions of higher learning. Although the issue is not a direct violation of the civil law, it does bring about questions of if public school students are given the mundane education they receive because of a certain bias that remains unrevealed by the government. Now that we have examined the moral laws in which the issue is violating, let's take a look at the stance in which Jesus would have on the issue. In order to do this, we will look at the Magisterium's belief on the issue. The Magisterium contends, contemporary culture is affected by several problems that are causing a widespread educational emergency. This expression refers to the difficulty in establishing educational relations, in order to be genuine, should convey vital values and principles to younger generations, not only to help vital growth, but also to contribute to building the common good. In essence, the Magisterium is referring to the lack of government funding for school and underdeveloped education systems as the educational emergency. The Magisterium then goes on to address what should happen: the portrayal of vital values and principles for the younger generation of pupils as a whole. This can be identified as Jesus' stance on the issue. Recall that sin is an offense against reason, truth, and the right conscience. It is a failure in genuine love for God and His children. It hurts the nature of man and devastates human solidarity. In doing so, it separates and damages the relationship humans have with God. Also recall that there are two types of major sins, mortal and venial. Mortal sin is the more serious of the two, which results in the complete separation from God. However, for a sin to be mortal, there must be three conditions that it meets. Number 1, the act must involve a grave manner. Number 2, the person must have full knowledge in doing the act. And number 3, the person must give his or her full consent in committing the act. The other sin is venial sin. Venial sin is the less serious of the two, resulting in a weakening of the relationship between human and God, but not completely damaging it. So, does our issue qualify as a sin? Action is the act of American minorities not attending colleges because of their intellectual and economic disadvantages due to the lack of proper formal education and lack of government funding. The intent or purpose of this issue can be argued. Looking at our purpose, many can argue that there is simply not a purpose or intent to the reason that minorities are not receiving an education they need to attend a well-established college, and that rather it is a contemporary issue that remains ambiguous to the church itself. Under its circumstances, modern America is a nation with both an abundance of wealth and poverty. Although the government can possibly do more to help fund education systems, due to the economical indifferences the nation is facing, the public school systems will continue to remain untouched. After the analysis of if this issue is a sin, the issue does not seem to be a direct intent meant to hurt humanity, but rather an inevitable societal obstacle that America has failed to mend. Therefore, it is not a sin. There are two main vices that are prevalent to the issue: injustice and cowardice. America has forgotten about the minorities left in the underperforming public school systems and failed to acknowledge all the inequality thresholds it has crossed. Virtues that could fix this matter would be justice, fortitude, and hope. America needs to ensure equality for young minority students by demonstrating what American character is built on: brave sacrifice. This can be accomplished with the help of God and the Holy Spirit. So how can this issue be resolved? Americans need to hold its public school systems accountable for the systematic disadvantages it is giving its minorities. This can only start by an insurgency among Americans standing in solidarity with those being directly violated. Minorities have the right to attend one of America's top 468 colleges, just as much as private school students do. However, the issue will not transform on its own. Thank you for listening to My Moral Outrage.